Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Wednesday to you. It's October the 30th, the day before Halloween. And yeah, we're talking a little bit more about some rain chances locally. Unfortunately, it looks like our best rain chance is going to be on Halloween, but really hoping that we may see things calm down a little bit between those trick-or-treat hours that we have in the early evening hours. But we've also got quite a bit to talk about here in the tropics. A little hard to believe that we're now ending October and going to be rolling into November. And usually about this time, we're not talking a whole lot about tropical weather, but it appears that November might start off to be kind of busy, at least according to some of our short, medium, and long-range models. So we'll get to that coming up in just a few minutes, and some interesting solutions too. And remember, we get new model runs about every 6 hours, depending on which model you're looking at. So there are going to be differences, especially as you get beyond 7 days out. But as you start to look at more consistency, you start to buy into some of the models just a little bit more. So we'll talk more about that coming up in just a minute. But it is a very warm and humid day across Acadiana, almost kind of getting on that threshold of summer-like, where our heat index is approaching 90 degrees. It feels like 88, the temperature 84. We've got a mix of sun and clouds, a little more of the cloud than sun this time around. Winds are out of the east-southeast at 5, but they pick up every once in a while. There's a decent breeze out there, but it's that dew point that's up to 70. So we've really enjoyed some of these overnight lows, 40s, 50s, 60s over the last couple of weeks or so. But the next couple of mornings, I don't think our temperatures are going to drop a whole lot below that 70-degree mark. So it is starting to feel a lot more like summer. But on the other side of that, when we do have that extra moisture in place, of course, you're going to be seeing a better chance for some widely scattered showers and thunderstorms. And considering, now I will say I was over at the Robichaux Center yesterday afternoon, and we had a brief rain for about 2 minutes, a pretty good downpour. I don't know if it would have been enough to amount to 1/100th of an inch of rain, but we didn't really check to see if the airport had picked up anything as far as our rainfall yesterday. But so far during the month of October, we've basically just seen a trace of rainfall, which was very, very early in the forecast or in the monthly period. And it looks like yesterday we didn't pick any up officially over at the Lafayette Regional Airport. So I believe this is day 36. So when it comes to the longest streaks, I want to say we're at like number 6 or number 7 on the longest streaks of no rain. And believe it or not, last summer did not even make the top 10. It was very, very dry and very, very hot, but last summer didn't even make the top 10. And almost all of the top 10s are September, October, or early November. So it's in the fall. So it's kind of interesting to see that. But you can see we've got a couple of isolated showers coming in here over southeastern Texas. I know I got a couple of friends that watch over in the Lone Star State. So hopefully you have gotten some rain, because I think you folks out there have not seen any rain for much longer than 30 or 35 days. And I'll go ahead and pull up the Slide L radar, see if there's anything kind of coming up here off toward the southeast. Yesterday this was a little bit more active, but it doesn't seem to be as active. Just a couple of isolated showers around the Chandelier Islands and maybe something trying to develop down toward the south. So we are going to be seeing rain chances increasing a bit today, and especially going into Thursday. And as you look at the traffic cams, you can see a little bit of convection there. You're getting those cumulus clouds, fair weather cumulus clouds. But if we can get enough instability in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, maybe we can spark off a couple of isolated showers. But I think the best chances for rain today are going to be over the far western sections of Acadiana. And what we're looking at here is a fairly deep trough that's here over the western part of the country. Big ridge of high pressure that basically extends from southeastern Canada all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico. So we are getting a decent pressure gradient out there, and that's picking up the wind speeds over the Gulf as well as much of southern Louisiana. And then also you get a little bit more of a pressure gradient as those stronger winds come around the bottom of that high. You're getting a bit of a low pressure area trying to develop down here to the south, and it might enhance that Central American Gyre that's been responsible for a number of tropical systems forming so far this hurricane season. And if you're not familiar with that, I have the description below. You can read about that at your convenience. But because of those stronger winds and that tighter pressure gradient, we are getting a bit more rough conditions out in the offshore waters. We got our winds basically out of the southeast at about 15 to 20, probably 20 to 25 if you get out beyond 30 nautical miles. And our nearshore waters are seeing 3 to 5 foot seas, which is pretty rough for South Louisiana. But then as you get into, and especially without a cold front coming through, and then in the far offshore waters, some of those seas have been building to about 6 or 7 feet. So if you're watching here from one of the platforms out in the Gulf of Mexico, you might be seeing some bigger rolls of waves and some decent skies out there. And if you are seeing anything interesting out there, drop a picture on my Facebook page. I'd love to see what's going on out in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico. But right now, you can see that there is some moisture that's starting to gather here over the western part of the Gulf, and that is going to be lifting up toward the north, and that'll be pushing just ahead of that cold front that's coming in from the west. Unfortunately, the cold front's not going to come through, so we're going to be kind of dependent on just more of a moist and unstable atmosphere and getting some daytime heating to get some of these showers and thunderstorms going. But there's a decent amount of moisture that's out over the Gulf of Mexico that is forecast to lift northward toward the Gulf Coast. But the area that's really been being watched, I've been kind of paying attention to this area now for a little over a week or so, and we're still seeing the moisture gathering here over the western part of the Caribbean Sea, a bit of a low pressure area trying to develop. We had a kind of a tropical wave that moved westward over Nicaragua yesterday. That's dissipating as it moves into the Pacific. And then you've got another tropical wave that's coming into the middle part of the Caribbean Sea right now. And there are a couple of other tropical waves that are out over the Atlantic Ocean too, but right now nothing is looking too interesting. But you can really see on the tropical Atlantic satellite there how strong that ridge of high pressure that's out here over the Atlantic Ocean. And again, that is going to tighten the pressure gradient in here. So there's going to be some gustier winds in the northern Caribbean islands and then back into the southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea. And if you get that broad kind of Central American gyre that kind of spins around Central America, you get those kind of disturbances that kind of roll around that. So we might get some enhancement of that coming up about 6 or 7 days from now, and that's why we think there's a fairly decent chance that there's going to be something developing over the western part of the Caribbean Sea within the next 7 days. I would put it more probably close to the end of the weekend where we would probably see a tropical system trying to develop there over the southwestern Caribbean Sea. Of course, in that particular area, that is the most likely place for tropical systems to form during the end of October and the early part of November, and really all of November in general. The Caribbean Sea is really your hot spot when it comes to tropical development, but the water temperatures there remained quite warm. They're anywhere between 28 and 31 degrees Celsius, so you're talking about 84 to 88 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale. But even the Gulf of Mexico still has 80-degree water just about everywhere except for right along the coast. And if a tropical system were to work its way through the Yucatan Channel, it would still have a chance to be able to sustain itself. But then as it gets a little closer to the coastline, the water temperatures alone would probably weaken anything that would come in that direction. And as far as the tropical cyclone heat potential, it's still sky high there south of Cuba and around Jamaica and south of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and even down into the southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea, you still have some high cyclone heat potential. So with warm waters and those warm waters going very deep, if something wants to try to develop there, it's going to have a lot of premium fuel to work with. And even though the Gulf of Mexico's TCHP has really dropped off, it's still in that moderate category there over the central and southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. I don't think it would inhibit any development in that area. It might inhibit some of that rapid intensification that we saw earlier in the hurricane season, particularly with Helene as well as Milton that was there over the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. But the TCHP levels were considerably higher over the Gulf of Mexico about a month ago. So we are seeing some relief there right now. But if you get something that's decently strong that moves into the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, especially if it's getting yanked by a decent trough, you get these really strong troughs that start to work across North America during November, and you get these systems that can move very, very rapidly from southward to northward or southwest to northeast northeast, similar to what we saw with Hurricane Zeta just a few years ago back in 2020. That one zipped along across New Orleans. It was in and out in a couple of hours, but it was still a Category 3 hurricane at landfall there down near Cocodrie. So check it out. This is the GFS model. This is fresh off the presses, and you can see kind of a low. It almost looks like two lows kind of doing that Fujiwara effect, kind of winding around. And then, of course, you're probably noticing how that low starts to slide into the Gulf of Mexico there. And this is just one model solution, but it does kind of form there near Jamaica and Cuba and then kind of round its way around that Central American Gyre. And then you've also got pretty strong ridge of high pressure that's going to be kind of centered here right off the East Coast. So anything that would develop down here in the Gulf or into the Caribbean Sea would most likely make a run kind of in that direction. I'm going to stop this on day 10. And what's really interesting about this is the GFS now has a tropical system in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico. Now this would be not this coming weekend, but a week from this weekend. So not this Saturday, but next Saturday. So that's your timing on there. But what's quite interesting is there's that big ridge of high pressure that would stay in that position. So if anything develops in that area, it would generally track off toward the west or west-northwest. But what's really interesting about this 10-day model, you've got another system here and another system here. So could we be talking about Patty, Raphael, and maybe Sarah? There's a possibility there, and the GFS has been suggesting multiple systems now for a couple of days, and it's been pretty consistent from model run to model run. The outlier this time around, though, is the Euro model, and as we look at the next 10 days, you kind of see a broad area of low pressure trying to develop over the southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea, but it really doesn't strengthen it. It doesn't materialize a whole lot. It does kind of have a general movement toward the west-northwest toward the Yucatan, but then you got this big trough right here that picks it up and just kind of wipes it out. So the Euro model, not quite as robust, but it's been kind of back and forth on developing something then not developing something, or developing something that's moderate, not really strong, but then getting torn apart by these stronger troughs that start to dig here across the United States as we get into the month of November. So the Euro is kind of the outlier right now when it comes to that 10-day forecast. As you can see, going out 10 days, the GFS has a system in the middle part of the Gulf, while the Euro really has maybe a broad low being absorbed by a frontal boundary and a fairly strong high pressure ridge kind of digging there across Texas. The upper levels have a bit more of a dip over New England, which would turn things more toward Florida, kind of take any kind of tropical weather or any kind of tropical moisture that might make its way in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico or the Yucatan Channel. Based on these upper level patterns that we're seeing here, most likely it would kind of pull this off toward the northeast and head it along the front out into the Atlantic Ocean. So let's move on to the Canadian model, and I will say the Canadian model is probably the most robust when it comes to developing something. Very similar track to what we saw with the GFS, but you can see it continues to strengthen there over the southeastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. There's a couple of things. You've got very warm water there, and you've also got high tropical cyclone heat potential. So the other thing that we need to be watching is wind shear, and just looking at that there, it doesn't seem to be affected by a whole lot of wind shear as it moves there through the Yucatan Channel, but there is more of a trough that is kind of digging here again across parts of Texas, which would probably pick that up and hopefully turn it away from Florida before it reaches. But based on that setup, it looks like more of a chance that it would turn more toward the north into the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, which could potentially bring a west coast of Florida strike. Of course, nobody wants to see that after we've seen Debbie and we've seen Helene, and then we saw Milton just more recently. The state of Florida is really bogged down when it comes to hurricane recovery because we've had 5 hurricanes hit the Gulf Coast. 1 hit Texas, 1 hit Louisiana, and 3 have hit Florida. And by the way, the record for the number of landfalling hurricanes and tropical or named storms along the Gulf Coast in one season is 6. So we're only 1 away from tying the all-time record. And I want to say that record was set way back maybe in the 1800s. So The Canadian model showing a pretty robust tropical system, but you might notice it's also indicating maybe another one here or maybe another ripple here. So kind of like what the GFS is showing, it might be talking about multiple systems. So that's why I'm saying it looks like at least one in November is pretty likely, but two or more is definitely a possibility. So finally, we'll finish out with the ICON model. And remember, the ICON model only goes out 7 days, but it develops low pressure there over the southern part of the Caribbean Sea, kind of turns up toward Jamaica, and then makes that turn around that ridge of high pressure that's going to be over here. And it has a bona fide tropical system also moving through the Yucatan Channel. But compared to the other models, remember, this is for day 7. So a little different than what you've got with the Canadian. That's day 10, and the GFS, that's day 10. So the ICON model is very similar to the GFS and the Canadian. So we've got 3 out of the 4 models that I'm looking at that are producing a tropical system in the northwestern Gulf, or rather the northwestern Caribbean, and potentially having it make its way into the Gulf of Mexico. So 3 out of 4 of my computer models are consistent with this forecast, and that's one of the main things that we tend to look for is consistency. Now, because models do go out 5 or out to 10 days here, you kind of got to dismiss stuff, but the more you see these models in agreement, model run after model run after model run, then you start to buy into it a little bit more. And of course, the models really don't know what they're forecasting at this point yet because nothing has developed. So once we get a tropical depression and we start flying planes in and out of these systems and getting more data, the computer models, of course, have much better solutions, or solutions that are a little bit more in line with each other. So right now, again, 10 days is kind of in la-la land, but what we do is we watch these trends each and every day. So at this point, I'm still not going to eat the remainder of my hurricane snacks, although it's very unlikely that we would see a tropical system make its way into the western part of the Gulf of Mexico. The eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico has seen November tropical storms and hurricanes before, particularly over the coast of Florida. So something just to kind of watch here for the next several days. Wind shear right now is not very good for any tropical development except for that extreme southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea. We've got a lot of wind shear right now that's over the islands here of the northern Caribbean. And down here, this is probably, if you're going to see any development today, that's where it would have to happen. But even the National Hurricane Center isn't expecting any development for a number of days. So you probably 3 or 4 or 5 days down the road, it might have a better chance because this is the wind shear going out to early next week. So the wind shear really drops off there over the western Caribbean and the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And this map is for early Tuesday morning. So we're going out into next week. But if we see that wind shear kind of drop from this to this, then anything that wants to try to develop here over the western part of the Caribbean would have a much easier chance. When you got that vertical wind shear, as those thunderstorms try to build around a center of circulation, they just get torn apart and they can't build high enough and get more organized to help that tropical system grow. But when you have low wind shear like this, it has a much easier time. So sometimes big Category 4, Category 5 hurricanes can kind of overcome some of the wind shear, but developing systems that are early in the stages of getting organized have a much harder time when it comes to wind shear. So let's move on to the tropical hazards outlook. And again, this is more of an experimental product that's become pretty much more of the standard this year. So we look first at the 7-day forecast that we get from the National Hurricane Center. And of course, that's giving you that 40% chance that we'll see some development over the next 7 days. But this map takes us out to week 2 and week 3, and this is a fresh map. So it's still indicating that there's an above normal chance of some development there over the western part of the Caribbean and even kind of sneaking here into the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. So that's November 6th through 12th. So that's next week. But what's interesting is it's still keeping things kind of above normal on development there over the western Caribbean and far western Atlantic, going all the way out into the middle and starting to get into the second half of November. Again, that's why I'm thinking that even though this hurricane season has been really strange, could we have a busier November? I think we had 5 named storms during the month of October. Normally, I think we have about 3 or 4. September, I think we had 5 named storms, and that's about on target. But back in August, it really was very quiet. We had all that Saharan dust and dry air out there. So after Hurricane Beryl made its way all the way across the Atlantic and across the Caribbean, into the Gulf and over into Texas, everything really shut down for much of August and at least getting into the early part of September before things really started to pop up once again. So it's a little bit off from what our normal frequency is, where we really start to see things ramping up during August, which didn't happen, but then September and October were very robust. So does that mean that November is possibly going to be busier than normal? At least some of the models are thinking so. But if you look at the levels here going through November, they are higher than July and going into the early part of August, especially when it comes to tropical storms and hurricanes. So you can have a decent number of systems. And back in 2022, we had 3. And back in 2020, we had 3. Hurricanes and tropical storms that formed during the month of November. So not out of the question to still see that. So I'll continue to watch those models, and as we do Let's Talk Tropics each and every day, we'll go through the new model runs, and of course if you're here every day, you'll see what the consistency is. And don't forget, I've got all of the links down in the description below, because what's so great about doing this on YouTube is all of these weather graphics are free and available to everybody on the internet. So I encourage you to get in there and mess around with some of the models, move the slider bars back around, look at the consistency from model run to model run, or compare the Euro with the GFS, and kind of do your own homework back and forth and just kind of see how things come together. Because that's what we do with Acadiana Weather Today and with Let's Talk Tropics. We just kind of try to gauge what's going on right now and see what the model trends to try to get you a little bit earlier on what of you knowing what's going to be happening over the next week to 10 days. Well, I hope you enjoy Acadiana Weather Today and Let's Talk Tropics. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, turn on those notifications, and make sure you tell your friends too to jump on board. And don't forget, starting on Monday, you'll hear my forecasts on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, as well as Freedom 95.1. And I will still be right here on YouTube, so between radio, YouTube, and any other broadcasts that they're going to throw at me, make sure you follow my social media pages, both on Facebook and X. Well, I hope you all have a great day. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. I will see you tomorrow morning for Acadiana Weather Today on a Thursday. Have a good one.